All right, welcome everyone, and thank you for being here today. Really appreciate seeing you this morning for the Small Grant Program webinar, and really excited to talk about some of the new elements of that program that we're going to go into some detail today. This webinar is being recorded, and we'll go ahead and post it on our website and on our YouTube channel afterwards. So if you or your colleagues want to take a look later on for any of the content, it'll be there. First, I'd like to introduce our OWEB team for this webinar today. I'm Eric Williams. I'm the Restoration Grants Manager. And with me today is on her last day of work at OWEB, Kathy Leopold, our Small Grant Program Coordinator, and our new Small Grant Program Coordinator, Teresa DeBartoleben, and managing the logistics and the recording, Ivy Clark Henry. And we have, looks like about, well, over 50 of you online. And we, again, really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today. What we're going to do is provide a fairly brief presentation about the changes to the small grant program, and then leave plenty of time for questions and answers and dialogue at the end. And we wanted to talk through some of this background so that people can be prepared for the changes that are likely to take place following our OWEB board meeting later in July. And we'll talk about the significance of that board meeting here in a few minutes. What I'd like to do is highlight first some of those key changes to the small grant program, some of which you may have already picked up on. And of course, the big one is, for the first time, OWEB will be offering grant awards with money attached for those that are the small grant team contact. And along with that, of course, is the expectation of additional engagement with eligible grantees in your community. That is one of the significant changes that the board approved in the small grant program, that the program will now be open to any eligible OWEB grantee. Versus in the past, it was limited to only watershed councils, soil and water conservation districts, and tribes. So that's a pretty significant change. And then that's going to require some engagement to bring other folks into the fold if they're interested. And for that reason, the board wanted to allocate funds to compensate the small grant team contacts for doing that engagement work and then coordinating the grant making process. So we'll talk about that today. And go into a little bit of detail, particularly on that small grant engagement award. We're not going to spend too much time on the small grant projects today because we wanted the focus to be on getting the small grant contact up and running and getting the teams engaged so that we can begin implementing projects as soon as possible. Let's go to the next slide.
I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and then pull up PowerPoint. Okay. Okay, are you able to see my screen?
Yes, thanks, Teresa.
Yep.
So a little bit of background, you can see the map showing the 28 small grant team areas that the board has approved. The program was established more than 20 years ago, and over that time has awarded more than $27 million for on-the-ground restoration. And its purpose, of course, is to make funds available to small grant teams to address local priority resource concerns, habitat values, and watershed functions. And really importantly, one of the main purposes of the program is to encourage landowner participation in watershed improvement. Oftentimes, as many of you know, the first experience a landowner might have with restoration is through a project funded through the small grant program. And it's really important as a catalyst to doing more restoration in your local watersheds. And so we appreciate those that are willing to take that step and put projects on the ground working with all of you. And as I mentioned, today, June 30th, is the final day when we say currently, the rules that we have in place on June 30th, the eligible applicants are those three entities that I mentioned earlier. That changes tomorrow, which is the effective date of the new small grant program rules that the board adopted. Let's look at the next slide. And in terms of that rule adoption, the board initiated this process 2 years ago now by authorizing rulemaking for the program. OWEB convened a rulemaking advisory committee, which we do for all of our rule sets that get revised. That rulemaking advisory committee, or RAC, included a dozen folks. Many of them are here in this room today, helping us to provide input on how to make changes to the program through our administrative rules. And of course, we went through a public comment and public hearing process on them that resulted in the board adopting these rules last fall. And as I mentioned just now, the effective date of the new rules is July 1st. We can't, however, implement some of the things we're talking about today until our board approves its spending plan for the 25-27 biennium. That is happening in July 22nd and 23rd at our board meeting in Pendleton. Some of the policy changes that will be included in that spending plan approval are the looking at the grant project limit. It's been $15,000 for a number of years. When we went through the rulemaking process, working with the RAC, we talked about how that changes over time, and of course, there's been a lot of inflation since that cap was generated. There's been changes to allowable indirect cost rates from 10% to 15%. And so what we're going to propose to our board is that they adopt a new small grant project cap of $20,000. The rules that were adopted allow that cap to be set by the board each biennium. So we don't have to go through the rulemaking process every time we want to change what the project cap is. So staff are proposing a $20,000 project cap. Staff are also proposing to our board next month that they include a $20,000 grant award for the small grant team contact to do the work to engage grantees in your small grant project regions and to coordinate the application and evaluation process for us. And the other significant change we're proposing in that spending plan decision is to increase the amount of funds available to each of the 28 teams. It's currently $100,000 for each team. It's been that way for a long time. And because of the increase in the project cap, we're proposing an increase to each small grant team region's allocation from $100,000 to $150,000. We wanted to have this webinar in advance of all of that because we want you to be able to get started working in the small grant program as quickly as possible. But we can't get started until the board actually formally approves those changes. So we're providing this information now so that you can begin planning to, for those of you that are interested in being small grant team contacts, you can begin planning what you'll need to do to get those applications ready, which will open up right after the board meeting in July. Let's go to the next slide. In terms of the rule highlights of the rule revisions that the board adopted last fall, as I mentioned earlier, it expands access to the small grant program to all OWEB eligible applicants. That's nonprofit. That includes, in addition to the 3 traditional applicants, nonprofit organizations, educational institutions, and so forth. Anyone that's eligible for any OWEB grant is now eligible for the OWEB small grants. That is the most significant change that the board made to the rules. And of course, the other highlight is allowing us to offer funding for that small grant team contact grant award. That's a significant change. And as I mentioned earlier, creating flexibility in setting the maximum award amount each biennium instead of waiting for rule changes, which typically happen about every 5 years or so. There were some revisions, adjustments to eligible small grant projects. We're not going to focus on those too much today. They're things like clarifying what types of urban stormwater projects are are eligible, clarifying when integrated pest management can be used, some changes to irrigation efficiency projects. Those were talked about at length in the rulemaking advisory committee process. And if need be, we'll think about potentially doing future webinars on that topic if there's interest and desire. But of course, at any time, folks can contact Teresa to get more information about that. And let's go to the next slide. And so as mentioned, we're going to focus today on that small grant team contact grant and not focus too much on the project grants. That process is similar to the way it's been done in the past, with a few changes that we'll talk about in terms of how those projects are administered. And for that, I'm going to turn it over to Teresa to talk about what that new process is going to look like.
Okay, great. Thanks, Eric. And so as Eric mentioned, for the upcoming biennium, we'll have two offerings, the Small Grant Team Contact Grant and the Small Grant Project Grants. In today's discussion for the Small Grant Team Contact Grant, we'll go over the application, the reporting, and the timeline for the offering. And then we'll briefly cover program changes for the project grants that are relevant for the Small Grant Team Contact. So for the application overview, the Small Grant Team Contact Grant offering essentially covers the duties and roles that were previously required of the Small Grant Team Contact. And so there will be new engagement activities for the grant, and questions in the application will ask you to describe engagement to current and newly eligible small grant team members. The application is meant to be short and streamlined. Small grant teams shall invite in writing, whether that be an official letter or through email, other eligible applicants in the small grant area to participate on the small grant team. Participation on the team is voluntary, and any eligible applicant that requests to participate on the small grant team shall become a member of the team. And members of each small grant team are encouraged to outreach and invite individuals with expertise in watershed and restoration discipline and other watershed restoration interest. In addition, the application will include questions on how the small grant team contact will outreach to new applicants for projects, including communities that are disproportionately impacted by climate change. For the required uploads of the application, for this biennium, we want to make sure that you please upload the approved 2023-2025 bylaws, but note that you will need to revise and resubmit new bylaws for the 25-27 biennium prior to opening the small grant project offering. And OWEB will provide bylaws as requested to any new and potential OWEB applicants. For the letters of support, we've required as an upload from prospective team members. Only one team contact per small grant area. Letters can be official letterhead or email confirming the entity is support of your organization being the small grant team contact for this biennium. And then in addition, OWEB will provide interested small grant team contacts the application template and guidance after the webinar today. And so we'll send those out to all the emails for the people that have registered with the webinar today, and we'll also post them on our website. So we'll give those to you all to, if you want to go ahead and get started on your application as well. Okay, so for reporting for the small team contact grant offering, there will now be a project completion report required for the small grant team contact to submit at the end of the biennium. The project completion report will be similar to the previously required biennial report. It'll be due 60 days after the grant closes at around August 30th of 2027. And so the project completion report will address how the team's funded projects demonstrated clearly watershed benefits to aquatic species, wildlife, and watershed health. The projects that met high priority watershed concerns, as well as which projects the team awarded for other watershed concerns. The project completion report will also ask you to provide a summary of the effectiveness of the teams, which will include any external interactions with landowners, applicants, grantees, project partners, and OWEB small grant program staff. And we'll also ask for internal interactions with each other on the small grant team. Just a summary of what those included. And then I wanted to go over the timeline of how the next few weeks to month is going to look like. And so once the board approves the spending plan, we will open the small grant contact grant offering through our OGMA system. And applications will be accepted through September 15th of 2025. OWEB will review and evaluate the grant applications as they come in. And once the awards are approved and grant agreements are executed, the grantee will complete engagement of current and newly eligible small grant team members. The grantee will submit new and updated procedures and bylaws adopted by the team for the 2025-27 biennium. OWEB will then review and approve the procedures and bylaws. And once that is complete, OWEB will open the team's offering for the small grant projects. And then lastly, one thing we wanted to is just additional information for the small grant team contact. And so for new applicants, engagement of new applicants, we want to make sure that you can do engagement through website or social media, booths at events, and searching websites that list nonprofits who may be interested in watershed restoration projects. And just please be sure to clearly outline engagement of new applicants in the grant application when you submit it. And then for each project application review, OWEB will require an evaluation from the small grant team contact. And so this is a little bit more than what we have asked for in the past, but we would just like a summary of comments by the review team, and OWEB will provide a template for you to use during the small grant team grant review meeting. And one new item that I think you all will appreciate is that team contact will no longer require to generate the grant agreement, and OWEB will now auto-generate all grant agreements through our online application process, similar to other OWEB grants. So with that, I think that was all that we had to go over with you all, and I think we can go ahead and open it up for questions if anybody has any questions. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And Eric and Kathy, if there's anything else you feel like we needed to touch base on, yeah, feel free to go ahead and add anything else.
Thanks, Teresa. There's been a couple of questions in the chat that I've responded to. Good questions. What we'd like to do for the remainder of our time is, if folks want to, you can use the raise hand feature to ask questions. You can continue putting them in the chat. And I can see one's already in there. Can a new entity apply for a project if they did not choose to become a part of the team at the start of the biennium? And I'll turn that one over to you, Teresa.
I'm sorry, your phone, or you cut out at the end.
The question is, it's in the chat, can a new entity apply for a project if they did not choose to become a part of the team at the start of the biennium?
I actually don't know the answer to that question, so I might have to punt to Kathy for that, noting that tomorrow is my official first start day.
Yes, great. This is a great question, and it's good to clarify this. Yes, someone could apply for a grant who is not a member of the small grant team. Someone can apply for a project grant who is not a member of the small grant team.
Great, thanks, Kathy. One other thing I'll just do here for your information is put a link in the chat to the new rules that take effect tomorrow. I know sometimes reading rules can be a bit dense, but the content's really important, so I'll put the link in there. So let's open it up to additional questions. Again, feel free to use your raise hand feature. If you can't find that, just shout out or go ahead and put your question in the chat.
Colleen has her hand up.
Thanks, Kathy. Go ahead, Colleen.
Thank you, everyone. This is really exciting. I think this is a really cool step forward for the small grant team. So, I do have a question about, a list of the newly eligible applicants. Are we, I mean, educational institutions, and is there a complete list somewhere of who we are, our recommendations of who we engage in the community?
We didn't publish a complete list, but our guidance will talk about places you can look for that information. One example is the Nonprofit Association of Oregon has on their website a list of their nonprofit organizations that are members, and you can sort those by category. And there's a category there for natural resources. And so that's one way to find out. I think another obvious one would be schools in your community, particularly those that might have, property with, say, a creek running through it that they want to do some restoration on. That's another example. That's one of the reasons we wanted to put some funding into these team contact grant awards, because we recognize it's going to take a little bit of effort to do that outreach to find out who might be active in your regions that might be interested in doing small grant projects. Kathy, Teresa, anything to add to that?
Oh, I'll jump in and say we did provide the list of the eligible tribes, watershed councils, and soil and water conservation districts, and we can post that on the website as well. So we do have that finite list of those organizations working in each small grant area. As far as the newly eligible, so that's the not-for-profit corporation, school, Oregon Institution of Higher Education, independent nonprofit institution of higher education, or political subdivisions of the state that is not a state agency. As far as those, we didn't develop a complete list for every small grant area because that it might be difficult to understand every one of those groups. So that's what we're asking for, the additional outreach from you. And as Eric said, we'll have some guidance in when we post the guidance document. We'll have some ideas in there for you as well. Thanks.
That's helpful. Thank you, guys.
All right, and there's a couple of questions in the chat. The first one is, I assume there will still be approved fiscal sponsors for grant applications. And that is correct if what you're talking about is someone who's got an OGMAS login and has been determined to be an eligible grant applicant. Yes, and many organizations choose to use a different organization as their fiscal sponsor. So as long as they are eligible and get an OGMAS login, they can be a small grant applicant. And then the next question is, what is the timeline for the small grant offering window? What our plan is for that is, because we want people to be able to get started as soon as possible. However, we have to wait till the board approves in the spending plan these policy changes and award amounts. We will open up that offering for the small grant team awards the day after the board meeting. And what we'd like to do is accept those applications on a rolling basis through September 15th. And so that's one of the reasons that we're going to send you a template for what that application is going to look like in the online system right after this meeting today, so that if you wanted to get started compiling the information for your small grant team contact application, you can do that right now and then be ready to go once the offering is made available on June 24th. All right, I've got a hand up from Virginia, and then we'll go to Debbie's question in the chat. So go ahead, Virginia.
Hi, I had a question regarding the project cap. You said it was raised to $20,000, and in previous iterations of this program, when the cap was $15,000, but you could ask up to $25,000 total, there was like kind of that idea that 2 projects could come out of that. Is there an increase outside of the, like a project can be $20,000? Is there an increase to the total cap of spending, or is it that 20,000 for each watershed council or each entity in their kind of initial round of project planning and applicating and putting in applications.
So first, I want to clarify the cap on projects. Actually, when the program started was 10,000, then it went to 15,000, and this proposal is to 20,000. There wasn't an additional increase cap above that. There has been an allocation for each team. Each of the 28 teams had an allocation of $100,000 to award in grants of a maximum of 15,000. That allocation is proposed to increase from 100,000 to 150,000. So theoretically, if you had people doing $20,000 projects, you could do 7 of those and have 10,000 left for one more project. And so those are the changes in the funding amounts. Was that what you were asking, Virginia?
Yeah, that clarifies. Thank you.
Okay. And then in the chat, we have a question from Debbie. Will there still be an opportunity for additional funds at mid-biennium? Yes, our plan is to include that in the policies that the board approves. And for those that aren't familiar with that system, a few years ago, the board established a policy where from the preceding biennium, funds that were not spent or projects finished under budget, instead of that money left on the table getting put back into the overall pot to reprogram it across the OWEB spending plan, up to a maximum of $500,000 of that is retained in the small grant program for access by those teams that have allocated 95% of their allotment by the midpoint of the biennium. And so if under the new system, if you're able to allocate 95% of your $150,000 team allotment by next July 1st, you would be eligible to have a share of those recaptured funds from last biennium. And we won't have a figure on that in terms of how much would be available for another 6 months, I think. But when we have that, then we'll know what the pot is. Right now, it's looking like there would be a substantial amount of funds available for that reprogramming. And the way that we do it is whatever number of teams there are that meet that 95% threshold, we'll divide the available funds equally among those teams. And Kathy, if you could remind me in the last couple of bienniums, what was the number of teams that was eligible for that reprogram? It was in single digits, I believe, but I don't recall the numbers.
Yeah, that's accurate. I think this biennium, 5 teams met the threshold and shared that pot. I think the previous biennium, 8 teams had met the threshold. So yeah, right in there in the single digits.
Thanks, Kathy. And another question in the chat, will the 25-27 bylaws be the same as the 23-25, specifically in the team makeup with the option to choose project evaluation committee? Kathy, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll jump in. The bylaws will look very familiar to folks that have been in there before. Subtle changes to reflect the new category of team membership and just a couple of other minor adjustments. But you'll still have all those touch points on how the team is going to operate for the biennium and the roles and responsibilities there too.
All right, thanks, Kathy. All right, there are other questions from the group. Okay, here's one for a small grant project. Does the applicant apply to the small grants team in their area or to OWEB? What is the role of the team if an applicant that is not on the team? Go ahead, Kathy.
I mean, jump in. Okay. So yes, when an applicant goes into OWEB's online application system, they will see a grant offering for each of the teams that is up and running. And so they will apply to the appropriate small grant team. The small grants team responsibility, if I'm understanding the question, is to review every application that comes through that portal for the small grant team's funding. So it doesn't matter if an applicant is a member of the team or not. The process there of application review would be the same. Let me know if I'm missing the point of that question.
Looks like Scott's got that. And I saw Liesel's hand go up and then come down. Liesel, do you still have a question? Okay, not hearing anything. Are there any other lingering questions on your minds? And as I mentioned earlier, of course, if you think of something after the webinar, always feel free to drop us a line, either via telephone, email, whatever your preferred method of communication is, and we will get you those answers as quickly as we can. There's another question in the chat. When will the small grant project offering open? And so we'll have to get the small grant team contact grant awards executed. And then once those are executed, then the small grant project offerings can open. Kathy or Teresa, anything to elaborate on that?
I think just once the OL will need to review and approve the 25-27 procedures and bylaws as well, and have those as approved prior to opening the small grant project offering for the team.
Great, thanks, Teresa. All right, I see we've got a hand up. Colleen, go ahead.
Thank you. One more quick question. So traditionally, our watershed council has been the small grant team contact in Lake County. Does the small grant team contact need to remain a watershed council or an SWCD? For example, Pheasants Forever is actively working in Lake County, and they just hired a new watershed coordinator. And, is there any type of different process if they become the small grant team contact here in Lake County versus us as a watershed council just reapplying?
Teresa, do you want to take that one?
Sure, as long as they are an eligible applicant and they fall under the categories that Kathy and Eric mentioned earlier, then they are eligible to apply for the small grant team contact offering. And nothing would be different if it was a watershed council or a different nonprofit. Everything would still be the same across the board.
Thank you.
All right. Are there other questions out here? We have, okay, we've got a couple in the chat. In the past, one team member, an organization has stepped up to be the lead for the biennium. With these new grant proposals, there could theoretically be competition with multiple organizations applying to the lead for the same team. Yes, that is correct. And that is the reason that we're asking for those applying to be the team lead to include written indication of support for that organization being the lead within the small grant team area. And our hope really is that if there are more than one organization, if there is more than one organization interested, that it would facilitate some dialogue among the organizations in the small grant team area to work out who should be the small grant team lead. And so this is a new process for us. We expect we'll be learning from it this first time out of the gate, and we'll make necessary improvements, adjustments in future bienniums if need be. But that is the status. Anything to add to that, Teresa or Kathy?
Yep, you got it, Eric. Thanks.
Okay. And minimum number of team members. Kathy, do you want to take that one?
OWEB is still requiring at least one, let's see, we need at least one member from two of the eligible categories. I'm not saying this
organization types
very well, but so we'd either want one watershed council and one SWCD, or one watershed council and one of the other nonprofit or other eligible category types. So we do want a mix of groups. But yeah, other than that, there's not like a minimum number aside from having more than one.
All right, the next question is, there will be only one team contact per small grant region? Yes, that is correct. We will only award one small grant team contact grant in each of the 28 small grant regions.
If I could just add one thing.
Kathy, go ahead.
In the small,
You appear to be muted. Oh, there you go. Okay, go ahead.
There's only one, yes, only one small grant team contact grant will be awarded. However, within that grant, in the budget, you could certainly share some of the funding in order to have more than one person helping, lift the load. So it's not as if we're, only going to allow one individual to do it. So it can still be a group effort. It would just be, the grant would be awarded, the team contact grant will be awarded to just one organization.
Yeah, that's a great point, Kathy. The contracted services budget line item can be used to provide funding to another organization who's helping with the workload. And then the next question is how to sign up for being on the small grants team. Who wants to take that one? Kathy, you want to take that one?
I'll jump in. So without wanting to be the team contact, I think you maybe would want to reach out to the other eligible team membership organizations and maybe have a discussion about who would like to lead the group, and then you would put forth your name as being on the team. Hopefully within the outreach efforts of whoever does decide to apply for the team contact grant, they will touch base with all the, or a good majority of the organizations that would be eligible. So I'm not exactly sure how to say it, but hopefully it'll be wrapped in with the engagement activities that the small grant team contact does.
Thanks, Kathy. And Debbie has a hand up.
I figured I'd ask this one out loud as opposed to trying to type it all in the chat. Is this going to be similar to the capacity grants, that there's not indirect costs, it's all considered? Or is it similar to the project grants where you have indirect and project dollars in the budget?
It is the latter. You do have access to indirect costs for these grants. These are not run the same way as the capacity grants. And the reason for that is these are what we, the language in the law and the statutes and the rules is this work is necessary for getting restoration projects on the ground. And in order to get small grant restoration projects on the ground, we have to have the teams organized and doing this evaluative that they're doing.
Okay, thank you.
Which leads to the next question, which is, can we use the team grant funds to provide funding for the evaluators as a stipend? And there's nothing in the rule that prohibits that. And if that's something that the team contact decides would be necessary for a better process, then yes, that would be eligible. All right, other questions from the group? All right, not seeing hands up or additional questions in the chat. Last call for questions, and then we'll break for the morning. All
Thank you,
right,
Karen.
and Karen, yes, thank you for that comment. And I think that sentiment is shared widely among our partners around the state. And it's, of course, bittersweet to have Kathy doing this on her final day of work at OWEB. But we are ever grateful that she's been willing to do this, and also will be ever grateful for the service she's provided to the state for the last 15 years. It has been amazing, wonderful, and has provided long-lasting benefits for all of us. And Kathy, we appreciate you. I know I'm embarrassing you right now, but I can't help it. And I'm seeing that in the comments in the chat as well. So with
thank you
that,
all.
we will close for the day. And thank you all for showing up for this webinar. We really appreciate your engagement today and our continued conversations around this newly envisioned small grant program. And thanks in advance for making it a success, which I know it will be. And just in our recognition of our inability to do this work without you doing the work on the ground, we will always keep that in mind and express our gratitude for that, because you're all the engine that makes OWEB go, and we appreciate you. So thanks everyone, and enjoy the rest of your Monday.